Hey there everyone, this is your best friend in programming, Coder Jeet, and in this video we are going to learn how to consume an API. It's gonna be a JSON API. We're gonna get JSON values from the API in Electron using HTTP. So Electron actually gives you some options to get data from APIs. There are actually 3-4 options that I'm gonna discuss, and we'll talk about how you can do this through any of these ways. And I think it's a good idea to learn all of them because it's fun. If you know how things work, it's always fun and you feel more liberated, you feel more powerful. So let's go ahead and learn how to do this. The first method we will learn is using the net package, which is native to Electron, a part of Electron. So let's go ahead. So what I have here is a very basic Electron app. It's just one simple form. It's an HTML file. This is the view, and let's run it now. I'm using NodeMon, and NodeMon is a package that will automatically run your app again whenever the file is modified, so you don't have to keep going back to the terminal and run it. So this is the application. It's very simple. The title is calling an API from Electron, and there is a text. So what you need to do here in this app is whenever you're bored, you can click a button and it will make a suggestion about something that you can do. And to do that, to make this suggestion, it's gonna call an API. This is called the board API, and it has got a very simple interface. You just call this particular endpoint and it sends you a JSON response with something that you could be doing. So we want this happening on the click of a button. This is my HTML code, and inside I've got a button here, simple button with an ID called call API, and this is the button text. I'm bored, what should I do? So here what I'm doing is I'm calling a function do something on click, and in that function I'm gonna write the code to fire the event to make that HTTP call. Now, if you remember, in Electron, you've got a renderer process and a main process, and the view is connected to the preload file using a bridge. Now, this is something that is the recommended stack, the recommended structure of an Electron app now to improve security and protection. You have to turn node integration off. So what I'm going to do is I have connected an index.js file, any standard JavaScript file. You can call it anything I want. I call it index. And this is the view JavaScript. It's empty right now, and I want to just create a function called do something, and in this function I will now call something from the bridge. I will call another function from the bridge, which will then make use of the node APIs to make the HTTP request. So let's go to step 2. This is my index preload, and I'm gonna just create a function called do something here too, and inside of this function we'll write the code to call the API. But first let's go to the index.js function and call the do something function from the bridge. So we'll do window.indexBridge.doSomething. So now this function will be called, and when we run it, still nothing's gonna happen. The first API is net, and the net API lives in the node.js process, which is the main process. So we have to call the main process from the renderer process. To do that, we need to use IPC renderer.invoke. We're going to use invoke here because we want to return a value from the main process and assign it to something that we'll show in the view. So we'll just call the do something function there too, the do something channel. So invoke is an asynchronous method which will also return a value. So it returns a value and we can store that value in a result. So let's do that and put await before invoke. And because await can only be called in the async function, we gotta make this function asynchronous too. And now that's done. Now before we actually run it, we have to also create the counterpart in the main renderer process, the main process, sorry. So here we are in the main process. This is main.js, and this is where we will capture the invoke. So we're gonna do IPC main.handle, and then do something. That's the name of the event, that's the name of the channel, whatever you want to call it. And then we can just create a function, and this is where we can actually do the operation of making the HTTP call, and that is next. Net is a native module of Electron, so we don't really need to install a package to use the net APIs, but we do need to refer to the net module. So we're going to do const net equals to require Electron. It's a part of Electron, and that should be it. It should expose the net module to us, and now we can make a call to net.request. So let's do that. Const request equals to net.request, and here we're gonna give the URL. Here's the URL. Let's paste it, and now the call is happening, but that's not all. We need to consume the results from the call. Now the net request object works a little differently. It will have an event, and we have to capture the event, so we can't really return a value from IPC main.handle. We need to change the plan a little bit. So let's do request.on, and here we will specify an event called response, and here we can do a method, a lambda function, where we can take further action on the data that we have got. We made a spelling mistake here. We got to write request, and to actually process the request, to actually send the request, we need to make a call to request.end. So now the request will go, and we're gonna get the response in the response object over here, but you just can't straight away use that response. You don't get the actual output in the response. It's actually the response call, the HTTP response, and you need to process it further. So we're gonna write response.on. Yes, it's another event, and data is the event as the data starts flowing to your response, and you don't get it all in one time, all in one time. You get chunks, and these chunks are actually this is a buffer array. This is a chunk of binary data. You just can't use it straight away, so you gotta store it somewhere. Let's create a variable called data, const data, and let's make it an array. Here we go, and here we will just store this data, that the chunk that we're getting inside this array. So we'll do data.push chunk. Here we go, and for good measure, let's also console.log it. So console.log chunk. I have it on my terminal. You can guess what it's gonna be. Now still we are not done. The data is flowing in, but finally when we have all the data, then we need to convert it into a usable form, and that's exactly what we're gonna do here. Response.on end. So when all the data comes in, the HTTP response has ended. We're gonna create another function, and we're gonna do const, let's call it JSON, is equal to buffer.concat. You're gonna concat a buffer array into a string, data to string. So we're gonna get the error here. Let's console.log it too, and let's clear our terminal and run it. Yep, this is the project building. You got the app here. Click on it, and then let's go and check out our terminal. We've got a buffer array. The data as it was published here, and finally we do have our JSON text also. So this is the response we got from the API. You have a JSON object, activity, look at your finances and find one way to save money, and type, and participants, and all this data is there. But before we can display it back on the screen, there is still more work to do. You see, we tried to do an IPC main handle, and we were gonna return a value to the preload, to the renderer process, but we can't really do that because these are all events, right? They're not gonna be called sequentially. This is not an asynchronous method. None of them is an asynchronous method, so we can't really call them and send the value from this function itself. What we're gonna have to do now is invoke a function on the renderer process, and the way to do that is to make a call to the browser window. This is the browser window object, the main window. So you're going to make a call to it, main window dot web contents dot send. We need to create another channel over here. Let's call it got data, and here we can send the JSON details, the JSON object that we got. Of course it has to be in the response@end function. So this is now going to be captured in our renderer process. So we are back to the renderer process. This is inter-process communication, and I do have a lesson on inter-process communications. If you are not clear about how inter-process communications works, you can check out that lesson. It's quite detailed. You will understand everything about it. But what we need to do here is capture this event, capture this channel event, and then process it. So again, we're going to go back to the preload. We're going to do IPC renderer dot on. That's a counterpart of send, and it's called got data. Call it event comma JSON. The send structure is a little bit different, and we're gonna console.log JSON just to see if there is any data in it. Got the form here, and when we click on it, see, this time we saw the data in Chrome Developer Tool. So in Node.js or in Visual Studio, we saw the data that we console.logged in the main process in the terminal, but anything that we log in the renderer process is going to be logged in the Chrome Developer Tools, and we can see the data over here. So the API call is being made, we've got the data, and now finally we can work on displaying it. So let's get that done. In our index.html, if you remember, we have a div with the ID what to do, so we're going to use that. In preload, we'll just create a reference to that. So var what to do, and you can do what to do dot inner HTML or inner text, whatever you want. Let's go for inner text equals to JSON dot, and we have to convert, this is still a string, we have to convert it to JSON. So we're gonna do JSON, this is gonna be all caps, that's the parser, JSON.parse, pass in the JSON object, and from here right away we can pass on the property name. In this case it was activity, and let's see what happens. Alright, here's the form. Let's click a button and see, we do get a response, learn the NATO phonetic alphabet, and that was the activity we got from the API. So you see how non-trivial it was to just make a simple call to a very simple API that has no arguments, no authorization, no OAuth, nothing. We had to do several callbacks, and the code was less than optimum. You cannot afford to code an entire application this way. That's why nearly no one uses the Electron's inbuilt HTTP functionality. People use one of the several helpful packages that are available. You can tap into the entire NPM package ecosystem. You can get a lot of ready code. So next we're gonna see some libraries that make things absolutely simple. The first package that we will look at is called Node Fetch, and Fetch APIs are gonna be the standard for calling APIs or making any kind of HTTP request online. In fact, even Node is going to make Fetch a standard part of their implementation. So these ugly HTTP APIs are going to go away, and Fetch is going to be standardized. So it's a good idea to learn Fetch. I have created a new function called do something fetch, and this is where we're going to implement the fetch version. And again, the process is quite more or less the same. We're going to call IPC renderer.invoke. This time we will actually get a value, but instead of invoking do something, we're going to invoke do something fetch, and in our view we're going to make a call to the do something fetch function. We're not going to call this, we're going to call this in the view, and now we'll write the actual do something fetch function in mains, IPC main.handle. We need a reference to the node fetch package from npm, so let's look for node fetch. Here we are. Now if you scroll down and read it, you will find out that the node package, the node fetch package, is an ES module. It's not a common JS module, so you can't require it. You need to import it, and if you're going to use it in common JS, that is our implementation. We are not using TypeScript, we are using CommonJS in Electron and Node. So we gotta install the second version of Node Fetch or create a reference to fetch using this particular line. So I'm just going to copy it and paste it over here. Go to the top and we've got fetch. This works perfectly fine. Let's take fetch and make that call. Calling fetch is this easy. Let's just copy it and paste it. And we need our URL. So we're going to get it from here. Here we go. And the URL is now implemented. So we should technically get the details in body. So we're just going to do return body because like I told you earlier, handle can return a value. Come back to index preload. We're getting a value. So just copy this over, paste it. And let's see if that works. All right, we have an error here. Await fetch does not work because await is only valid in async function. So we need to mark our function async. Let's go back and do that. It's this function. We need to put in async over here because we are doing a bunch of await calls. All right, it's running now. Let's click on it. All right, we got an error here that the certificate has expired for this site. Let's try to make an HTTP request instead of HTTPS. Maybe the SSL certificate of this site is not working properly. Got the site and click. Okay, JSON is not defined. We have another error because we are referencing JSON in our function somewhere. Yeah, we are trying to parse JSON, but there is no such thing as JSON anymore. It's result. So yeah, this happens. So just put result over here. That should do it. And one more time, third time lucky. Here we go. And yes, we got the data. So see how much easier fetch is. We made a simple GET request this time, but POST is not so much difficult. All you need to do is pass a JSON object with method POST and the body, and you can do complete set of HTTP calls. You can call any API using fetch. It's super easy because it's asynchronous and straightforward. The next package we're going to look at is called Axios, and it's one of the most popular ways to make HTTP requests. Let's dive in. Axios is insanely popular in the entire Node and Electron ecosystems. You can see it's got more than 26 million downloads this week itself. So that's pretty epic. And using it is very easy. It supports CommonJS too. Let's get started by installing it first. npm install Axios. You can use it practically anywhere. And it's pretty straightforward. You just need to do axios.get. Now you can see that this is promise-based architecture. You can see the get, then catch, and then again. So this is promise-based architecture, but you can also apply async await. I absolutely prefer async and await. It makes things easier. So let's do that. This time let's call a new function. Let's create a new function called do something Axios. Let's go to index.preload, copy this, do something fetch, and let's just call it do something Axios. And we're gonna do another function again in main2 called do something Axios. Let's put a comma here to remove the error. Let's review this. Everything looks okay. Let's create this in the main, copy it over, use it, and go back. Here we go. Now instead of fetch, we're gonna use Axios here. So let's create a reference to it. Const Axios equals to require Axios and Axios.get. Instead of fetch, we're gonna do Axios.get. It returns a response. So I think that should be it. Honestly, we're just gonna return the response. Let's see what happens. Here we go, run start, and click, and we've got the data again. You can see that this was absolutely easy to implement, even one line lesser than fetch, and the system is quite okay. You don't need the promise architecture. Async await is much superior to promises, and it actually is a wrapper for promises. So you are using promises inside, and it just makes things simpler. This is how the post request is done. You can easily send a JSON object to the URL, to the API, and get the response. So Axios is something I would recommend to you today. You can use it and it works very well. It's quite stable. And finally, the last package that we're gonna look at is called GOT. GOT is also a very popular package, 22 million downloads this week. We're gonna start the same way. Instead of do something Axios, let's call it do something GOT. In index preload, we're gonna make another function, do something GOT. Pretty much the same. Let's go in main.js and first get a reference to GOT. npm, we gotta install it first. npm install GOT. All right, that's done. Now we're just gonna get a reference to it. Const GOT equals to require GOT. That's done. Let's create a new handle function. Do something GOT, and we're gonna do GOT dot get. So this is a sample call that does GOT dot post. We're gonna do GOT dot get. All right, let's run it. Okay, and we have an error because it seems that GOT is an ES module too, so we just need to modify this a little bit. We'll remove this, and instead of we'll just copy over the fetch one, and instead of fetch everywhere, we'll just call it GOT. So import GOT, default fetch, and fetch GOT args. So this should work, and let's try again. Let's see what happens. It's running, and when we click on it, we get the data backup important computer file. So that's another thing we can do when we are bored. In index.preload, the code was just the same, do something GOT. We made a call to the main process using this line, and then we just parsed the result and showed it in the inner text. That's how easy GOT is. So if you're gonna make HTTP calls, there are now multiple ways you know how to do that. Axios and GOT both are easy, both are based on async and await. Now guys, if you like this video, if you found this video useful, please don't forget to hit the like button. It's gonna help me make more videos, and please hit subscribe so that you can continue receiving content from me, and let me know what else should I create videos on. This is your best friend in programming, Coder Jeet, signing off.